Welcome to insane HOA madness. The HOA treated receipts like contraband. You are not allowed to do that without a permit. That is what Kimberly Howard said to me at the mailbox cluster on a Tuesday in October. She was the president of Pheasant Run HOA Incorporated here in Boise, Idaho, and she was holding a clipboard with colored tabs like it was a weapon. I had just walked down to collect my mail after a long shift installing security cameras for a client in Meridian. My leg was still recovering from a fall I took off a ladder 3 weeks earlier, and I was moving slow. Kimberly did not care. She stepped directly into my path, slammed her clipboard onto the metal shelf beside the mailboxes, and told me I was in violation. I install security systems for a living, so I understand cameras, timestamps, and privacy laws better than most people. I also understand when someone is lying to my face. The violation she cited was for an exterior modification I never made. I asked her to show me the rule. She flipped through her tabs, found a laminated page, and stabbed it with her finger. The section she pointed to did not match the covenants I received when I closed on my house 2 years ago. I told her that. She told me the board voted in executive session, and I was never allowed to know why. That sentence unlocked something in my memory. A neighbor mentioned something similar 6 months ago. A guy 3 streets over got hit with a lien for a landscaping violation that did not exist in the covenants. He paid it and moved. Another family got fined for parking a work van overnight, even though the rules allowed commercial vehicles under a certain size. They fought it, lost, and sold. I did not pay much attention at the time because it did not affect me. Now it did. Kimberly handed me a violation notice printed on Pheasant Run letterhead. It had my address, the date, and a description of the alleged modification. It also had a compliance deadline, 5 business days. If I did not cure the violation by then, the fine would start at $50 per day and increase every week. I asked her what modification she was talking about. She said a camera mount on my front fascia. I told her I never installed a camera mount on my fascia. She told me she had photographic evidence. I asked to see it. She said the evidence was confidential and would be presented at a hearing if I requested one. I told her I wanted a hearing. She said I had to submit a written request within 48 hours or forfeit my right to appeal. I walked back to my house with the notice in my hand and my mind already running through the timeline. I have never mounted anything on my fascia. I do camera installs for clients, but my own house has a completely different setup. Discrete wireless units tucked under the eaves with no visible hardware. I pulled up the photos I took during my initial install last year. Nothing on the fascia. I checked my purchase records, no mounts ordered. I grabbed my phone and took fresh pictures of every angle of my front exterior. Still nothing. Then I remembered the cold case. The guy 3 streets over. The one who got hit with the landscaping lien. His name was Trevor. I met him once at a community yard sale before he moved. He told me the HOA claimed he planted unapproved shrubs in the front yard, but he swore he never touched the landscaping. He showed me photos proving the shrubs were there when he bought the house. The HOA refused to look at his photos. They said their records showed he planted them. He paid the lien and left because fighting it would have cost more than the lien itself. I pulled out my laptop and opened the portal for Pheasant Run HOA. The association uses a third-party management company called Ridgeline Property Services. The portal has sections for violations, payments, meeting minutes, and documents. I clicked on the Documents tab and scrolled back 2 years. I found the covenants I was given at closing. I downloaded them and opened the PDF. I searched for the word fascia. It appeared twice, both times in a section about architectural modifications. The rule said any modification to the exterior structure required advance written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. It did not say cameras were prohibited. It did not say mounts were prohibited. It said you had to ask first. I never installed a mount, so I never asked. But even if I had, the rule was about approval, not prohibition. Kimberly was citing a rule that did not exist. I took screenshots of the relevant pages, printed them, and highlighted the sections. Then I checked the meeting minutes. Pheasant Run holds board meetings monthly. The minutes are supposed to be posted within 10 days of each meeting. I scrolled through the last 12 months. Half the meetings had no minutes posted. The ones that were posted were vague, bullet points with no details, no votes recorded, no motions listed. just statements like architectural review discussed or compliance matters addressed. I needed to know if anyone else had been hit with violations that did not match the covenants. I sent a text to my mail carrier, a guy named Eugene who has been delivering on this route for 6 years. Eugene sees everything. He knows which houses have HOA drama because he delivers the violation notices. I asked him if he remembered Trevor, the guy who moved after the landscaping lien. Eugene replied within 10 minutes. He said Trevor was not the only one. He said Kimberly had been posting violation notices on at least 4 houses in the last year, all for violations that seemed invented. He said one family got a notice for a fence color that matched the approved palette exactly. Another got fined for holiday lights being up past January 10th, even though the covenant allowed lights until January 15th. Eugene said he kept delivering the notices, but he also kept wondering why nobody pushed back. I decided to push back. I drafted my hearing request and submitted it through the portal that night. The next morning, I got an automated reply confirming receipt. The reply said my hearing was scheduled for November 2nd at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. That gave me 2 weeks to prepare. I started building my file. I printed my original covenants, my photos, my purchase records, and the violation notice Kimberly gave me. I added the screenshots of the incomplete meeting minutes. I labeled everything with dates and times. I work in systems, so I know how to document. 3 days later, I got a second notice. This one was delivered by certified mail. It claimed I missed a mandatory pre-hearing conference on October 18th. I checked my calendar. October 18th was 4 days ago, and I was never notified of any conference. The notice said that because I failed to attend, the hearing was canceled and the violation was now considered admitted. The fine schedule would begin immediately, $50 per day starting October 21st. I called Ridgeline Property Services. The receptionist transferred me to the compliance officer, a woman named Monica. I explained the situation. Monica put me on hold for 3 minutes, then came back and said there was no record of a pre-hearing conference scheduled for October 18th. I asked her to confirm that in writing. She said she would send an email. I asked when. She said within 24 hours. I thanked her and hung up. The email never came. I followed up the next day. Monica did not answer. I left a voicemail. No callback. I sent a second email through the portal requesting written confirmation that no conference was scheduled. The portal marked it as delivered, but I got no response. Meanwhile, the fines were accruing. According to the second notice, I now owed $50 for October 21st, $50 for the 22nd, and $50 for the 23rd. $150 total, with more added daily. I knew what was happening. Kimberly was running a selective enforcement scheme, and the management company was either complicit or negligent. I needed proof that this was part of a pattern. I needed the old cases. I drove to the county clerk's office and requested lien records for Pheasant Run HOA over the past 3 years. The clerk pulled up the database and printed a list. There were 7 liens filed in that time. 3 were for unpaid dues, which is normal. 4 were for violation fines that escalated into liens. I recognized 2 of the addresses, Trevor's house and another one on Copper Ridge Lane. I requested copies of the lien documents. The clerk charged me $12 and handed me a folder. Back in my truck, I opened the folder and read through the liens. They all followed the same pattern. A violation notice for something vague or borderline, a missed hearing or a canceled appeal, escalating daily fines, a lien filed within 60 days. The lien amounts range from $800 to $3,000. None of the violations were for major issues like structural damage or safety hazards. They were all petty, unapproved paint color, unauthorized planter box, holiday decorations past deadline, minor landscaping change. And every single one was filed under Kimberly Howard's signature as HOA president. I pulled out my phone and called Trevor. I still had his number from the yard sale. He answered on the 3rd ring. I told him who I was and why I was calling. He laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. He said he was glad someone was finally looking into it. He told me his story in detail. The shrubs were already in the yard when he bought the house. The HOA claimed he planted them 6 months after closing. He asked for proof. They said they had dated photos. He requested copies. They refused, citing confidentiality. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer requested the photos through formal discovery. The HOA stalled for 2 months, then produced a single grainy image with no metadata, no timestamp, and no context. Trevor's lawyer said it was worthless as evidence, but the hearing panel ruled against him anyway. Trevor paid the lien because continuing the fight would have cost more than the lien itself. He sold the house 3 months later and moved to Nampa. I asked Trevor if he kept any of his records. He said he kept everything. I asked if I could see them. He said he would email me scans tonight. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called the second address, the house on Copper Ridge Lane. No answer. I left a voicemail explaining who I was and asking them to call me back. That night, Trevor emailed me a 32-page PDF. It included his original violation notice, his hearing request, the denial letter, the lien filing, and his attorney correspondence. I read every page. The violation notice was dated March 15th of last year. It claimed Trevor planted 3 boxwood shrubs in his front yard on February 20th. Trevor's defense was simple. The shrubs were there when he closed on January 5th, and he had photos to prove it. The HOA hearing panel dismissed his photos as inconclusive. The panel's ruling was signed by 3 board members, Kimberly Howard, Dale Finch, and Susan Merrick. The ruling said the HOA had photographic evidence that the shrubs were not present in January and were present in March. Therefore, Trevor must have planted them in February. I compared Trevor's notice to mine. The format was identical, same letterhead, same font, same layout. The description field was a fill-in-the-blank template. The signature block at the bottom had Kimberly's name printed, but the actual signature was a scan, not an original. I zoomed in on the signature. It was the same signature on both notices, not just similar, identical, pixel for pixel. That meant Kimberly was using a digital signature stamp, and she was pre-filling violation forms in bulk. I checked the metadata on Trevor's PDF. The original notice was created as a Word document on March 10th, 5 days before the violation date listed on the form. Someone had backdated it. I opened my own notice and checked the metadata. Same thing. The file creation date was October 10th, 6 days before Kimberly handed it to me at the mailbox. The form was pre-filled, pre-signed, and printed on demand. I now had 2 pieces of evidence, identical signatures and backdated documents. I needed a third to make the case airtight. I needed proof that Kimberly was selectively targeting people who were less likely to fight back. I called Eugene, my mail carrier, and asked him if he could give me a list of addresses where he delivered HOA violation notices in the past year. He said he could not share official postal information, but he could tell me what he remembered. He rattled off 6 addresses. I wrote them down. 3 of them were on the lien list I got from the county. The other 3 were still open cases. I decided to visit the 3 open cases. The first address was a rental property 2 blocks from my house. The tenant answered the door. She said she got a violation notice 3 weeks ago for parking a sedan in the driveway overnight. The covenants allowed overnight parking for residents. She showed me the notice. Same template, same signature, same backdated metadata. She said she ignored it because she knew the rule did not apply to her. I asked if she got any follow-up. She said no. I asked if I could take a photo of her notice. She said yes. I thanked her and moved to the next address. The second address was a house on Falcon Drive. The owner answered. He was an older man, maybe 70. He said he got a violation notice 2 months ago for an unapproved mailbox post. He said the post was installed by the builder in 2008 and had been there for 16 years. He showed me his notice, same template. I asked him what he did about it. He said he called Ridgeline and they told him to submit a variance request. He submitted it. He never heard back. The fines started accruing anyway. He said he paid them because he did not want a lien on his house. He paid $400 total. I asked if he kept receipts. He said yes. I asked if I could see them. He went inside and came back with a folder. I took photos of everything. The third address was a house on Quail Run. Nobody answered. I left a note with my phone number and walked back to my truck. On the way, I passed Kimberly's house. It was the largest house in the neighborhood, a 2-story Craftsman with a 3-car garage and a professionally landscaped front yard. There was a Pheasant Run HOA sign on the lawn that said Board President with Kimberly's name underneath. I took a photo of the sign and kept walking. By now it was late afternoon on October 25th. My hearing was supposed to be on November 2nd, but the hearing had been canceled by the bogus pre-hearing conference letter. I still had not received written confirmation from Monica at Ridgeline that no conference was scheduled. I sent another email. Still no response. I decided to go to the Ridgeline office in person. Ridgeline Property Services operates out of a small office park near the airport. I arrived at 4:30 p.m. The receptionist told me Monica was in a meeting. I said I would wait. She said Monica's meetings usually ran late. I said I had time. I sat down in the lobby and pulled out my evidence binder. The receptionist kept glancing at me. After 20 minutes, Monica came out. She looked surprised to see me. I stood up and introduced myself. I told her I was the homeowner with the fascia violation case, and I needed written confirmation that no pre-hearing conference was scheduled for October 18th. Monica looked uncomfortable. She said she would check the system and send me an email by end of day. I told her I would wait while she checked. She hesitated, then went back to her office. 5 minutes later, she came out with a printed letter. The letter confirmed that no conference was scheduled for my case on October 18th or any other date. It was signed by Monica and dated October 25th. I thanked her, folded the letter, and left. Now I had proof that Kimberly fabricated the pre-hearing conference. I added Monica's letter to my evidence binder. That night, I got a call from the third address, the house on Quail Run. The owner's name was Marcus. He said he got my note. He said he got a violation notice in September for an unapproved fence stain. The covenants allowed natural wood stain in tan, brown, or gray. His fence was stained gray. He submitted photos proving it. The HOA said the stain was too dark and demanded he restain it in a lighter shade. He refused. The fine started. He paid $600 before he gave up and restained the fence. He said he kept all his records. I asked if I could meet him. He said tomorrow morning. I said I would be there at 9. I met Marcus at his house the next morning. He handed me a file folder with his violation notice, his photo submissions, and his payment receipts. The notice was dated September 8th. The metadata showed the file was created on September 3rd, 5 days before the violation date. Same pattern. Marcus also had email correspondence with Monica at Ridgeline. In one email, Monica acknowledged that his fence color appeared to comply with the covenants, but she said the Architectural Review Committee had final authority. In another email, Monica said the committee determined the stain was non-compliant based on a site visit. Marcus asked for the date of the site visit. Monica never replied. I took photos of everything and thanked Marcus. I now had 4 cases with the same pattern: backdated notices, identical signatures, vague or fabricated violations, and escalating fines. I needed to connect it to a motive. Why was Kimberly doing this? The fines were not huge. The liens were a few $1,000s each. Then I remembered something Eugene told me. He said one of the families paid their fine in cash directly to Kimberly at her house. That was against HOA rules. All payments are supposed to go through Ridgeline. I called Eugene and asked him which family. He said it was the house on Copper Ridge Lane, the one I had not been able to reach. I drove over there again. This time a woman answered. Her name was Lisa. She said her husband got a violation notice last year for holiday lights being up past the deadline. The covenant allowed lights until January 15th. Their lights came down on January 12th. The HOA said they were still up on January 16th and fined them $50 per day. They had photos proving the lights were down. The HOA refused to look at the photos. Lisa's husband got fed up and paid the fine in cash just to make it go away. He paid it directly to Kimberly at her house because Kimberly told him it would clear the fine immediately and avoid additional processing fees through Ridgeline. Lisa said Kimberly gave them a handwritten receipt, but it was not on HOA letterhead. I asked if she still had the receipt. She said no, her husband threw it away. I asked if she remembered the amount. She said $350. I asked if she remembered the date. She said February 9th of last year. I thanked her and left. $350 in cash, no official receipt, No record in the Ridgeline portal. That was embezzlement. I checked the portal that night and searched for payments from Lisa's address. There was no payment recorded in February of last year. The violation was listed as closed, but the closure note said the fine was waived due to a clerical error. That was a lie. The fine was not waived. It was paid in cash to Kimberly, and Kimberly pocketed it. I now had 5 pieces of evidence: backdated notices, identical signatures, a fabricated conference, selective enforcement, and embezzlement. I needed one more to make it undeniable. I needed proof that Kimberly was using the management company as a shield. I needed to know if Monica was complicit or just following orders. I decided to test it. I sent an email to Monica through the portal requesting copies of all Architectural Review Committee meeting minutes for the past 2 years. The covenants require the committee to meet monthly and keep minutes. I wanted to see if the committee was even real. Monica replied the next day. She said the committee minutes were not public records and required a formal records request. I sent a formal records request citing Idaho Code 3030-11, which requires HOAs to provide records to members within 10 business days. Monica replied again. She said the request was received and would be processed. 10 business days came and went. No records. I sent a follow-up. No response. I sent another. Still nothing. By now it was November 8th, 6 days past my original hearing date. I had not received any further correspondence from the HOA, but the fines were still accruing according to the second notice. I was now supposedly at $900 in fines. I decided to escalate. I contacted an attorney named Sarah Gregg, who specializes in HOA disputes. I met with her on November 9th and showed her my evidence binder. She spent an hour reading through everything. When she finished, she said I had a strong case for selective enforcement, procedural violations, and possible embezzlement. She said the backdated notices and the fabricated conference were smoking guns. She said the missing committee minutes suggested the committee did not exist, which meant all the violations were invalid. She said she could send a demand letter to the HOA and Ridgeline on my behalf, but it would cost $1,500 up front. I told her I needed one more piece of evidence before we went that route. She asked what I was looking for. I told her I needed proof that someone inside the management company was helping Kimberly cover it up. She said that would be hard to get unless someone talked. I said I was working on it. I kept my plan quiet because the HOA depends on controlling the narrative. If Kimberly knew I was connecting the cold cases, she would destroy the evidence. I needed to catch her in the act. I needed her to lie on record. I needed a witness. I asked Eugene if he would be willing to testify about the pattern of violation notices he delivered. He said he would, but he could not get involved officially unless subpoenaed. I asked him if he would at least give me a written statement. He said he could do that off the clock. I drafted a statement summarizing what he told me, the addresses, the frequency, and the fact that Kimberly was personally handing out notices at the mailbox. Eugene signed it on November 10th. I added it to my binder. That same day, I got a third notice. This one was not mailed. It was taped to my front door. It said I was now in violation of a second rule, failure to maintain the exterior paint. The notice claimed my front door was peeling and required repainting within 10 days or face an additional $50 per day. I walked outside and inspected my front door. The paint was fine. No peeling, no cracks, no fading. I took photos. I also took a video walking around my entire exterior showing that every surface was in good condition. I uploaded the video to a cloud drive and sent the link to Sarah Gregg. She replied within an hour. She said the second violation was retaliation and we needed to move fast. She said she would draft the demand letter tonight and send it tomorrow. I told her to hold off one more day. I had a plan. I called Marcus, Trevor, Lisa, and the tenant on the rental property. I asked them if they would be willing to meet with me and compare notes. They all said yes. I scheduled the meeting for November 12th at 6 p.m. at a coffee shop in downtown Boise. All 4 showed up. I brought my evidence binder. We spent 2 hours going through every case. The patterns were undeniable. Every violation was either fabricated, backdated, or selectively enforced. Every fine escalated quickly. Every appeal was denied or blocked. Every payment went into a black hole with no accountability. Trevor said he wished he had fought harder. Lisa said she regretted paying in cash. Marcus said he wanted to file a complaint with the Idaho Attorney General. I told him that was exactly what I planned to do, but first I needed to force Kimberly to go on record one more time. I needed her to lie in front of witnesses. I sent an email to Kimberly through the HOA portal on November 13th. I copied Monica and the other 2 board members, Dale Finch and Susan Merrick. The email said I was disputing both violations and requesting an immediate hearing. I said I had documentation proving the violations were invalid and I intended to present it. I said I also had evidence of procedural violations by the board and I expected a written response within 48 hours. I sent the email at 9 a.m. By noon, I got a reply from Kimberly. She said my hearing request was denied because I failed to cure the original violation and I was now in default. She said the fine schedule would continue. She said if I had concerns about the process, I could file a complaint with Ridgeline. She did not address any of my specific claims. She signed the email with her catchphrase, "You can be mad, or you can be compliant." I forwarded the email to Sarah Gregg. She called me 10 minutes later. She said Kimberly just made a critical mistake. By denying the hearing, she violated Idaho HOA law, which requires associations to provide a fair hearing before imposing fines. Sarah said we could now file a lawsuit for procedural violations and ask for an injunction to stop the fines. I told Sarah I wanted to try one more thing first. I wanted to confront Kimberly in person and record it. Sarah said that was risky. I said I knew, but I also knew Kimberly could not resist escalating when challenged. Sarah said if I was going to do it, I needed to do it in a public place with witnesses, and I needed to keep my composure no matter what she said. I told her I would. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more neighborhood drama and receipts mode justice. I drove to the mailbox cluster at 5:45 p.m. on November 14th. It was a cool evening with sharp contrast and dramatic shadows. The mail delivery happens around 6, so I knew people would be gathering. Eugene was scheduled to deliver at 6:10. I parked my truck and walked over with my evidence binder. I opened it and started reviewing my notes. Within 10 minutes, 3 neighbors showed up to check their mail. One of them was Marcus. He nodded at me. I nodded back. At 6:15, Kimberly's car pulled into the lot. She got out holding her clipboard with colored tabs. She saw me immediately. She walked straight toward me. She did not say hello. She said, "You need to leave. This is common property and you are trespassing." I said, "I live here. I am checking my mail." She said, "You are in default. You have no privileges." I said, "Show me the rule that says I cannot check my mail." She flipped through her tabs. She could not find it. She said, "I do not need to show you anything. The board has authority to suspend privileges for non-compliance." I said, "I am compliant. I never violated any rule." She said, "You have 2 active violations and you refuse to cure them." I said, "The violations are false. I have proof." She said, "I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes." That line was going to haunt her. Marcus stepped closer. He said, "Kimberly, he has a right to be here." Kimberly turned on him. She said, "You are not part of this conversation." Marcus said, "I am a homeowner. I am always part of this." By now, 2 more neighbors had walked up. Eugene arrived with his mail cart. He stopped and watched. Kimberly saw him and tried to wave him away. Eugene stayed. I pulled out my binder and opened it to the first page. I said, "Kimberly, I have your violation notice from October 16th. The metadata shows it was created on October 10th. You backdated it." She said, "That is not true." I said, "I have the file properties right here. I can show you." She said, "I do not care about metadata. The notice is valid." I said, "You also sent me a letter claiming I missed a pre-hearing conference on October 18th. Ridgeline confirmed no conference was scheduled. You fabricated it." She said, "Ridgeline does not control the board's internal procedures." I said, "Then show me the meeting minutes where the conference was scheduled." She said, "Executive session. Confidential." I said, Idaho law says you cannot use executive session to avoid transparency. She said, you are not a lawyer. I said, no, but I hired one. She says you are violating state law. Kimberly's face went red. She said, you can threaten me all you want. The fines stand. You owe $900 as of today, and it goes up $50 tomorrow. I said, I am not paying fines for violations I did not commit. She said, then we will file a lien. I said, go ahead. I will sue you and the board personally for selective enforcement and embezzlement. She froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then she said, what are you talking about? I said, you took cash payments from homeowners and pocketed the money. You covered it up by marking the violations as waived. I have witnesses. She said, you are lying. I said, Lisa on Copper Ridge Lane paid you $350 in cash on February 9th of last year. You gave her a handwritten receipt. The payment is not recorded in the Ridgeline portal. Where did the money go? Kimberly looked around. The neighbors were staring. Eugene was staring. Marcus was staring. She said, I do not have to answer your accusations in the parking lot. I said, then answer them at a board meeting. I am requesting a special meeting under Idaho Code 30-30-107. I will present my evidence and you can respond on the record. She said, the board does not grant special meetings for harassment. I said, it is not harassment. It is a formal complaint. She said, you have no standing to file a complaint. You are in default. I said, you cannot strip my standing by inventing violations. She jabbed her clipboard toward me. She said, you can be mad or you can be compliant. I said, I am compliant. You are the one violating the rules. She said, I am the president of this association. I decide what the rules are. Eugene cleared his throat. Everyone turned to look at him. He said, ma'am, I think you should stop talking. Kimberly glared at him. She said, who are you? He said, I am the mail carrier. I have been delivering notices for you for 2 years. I see the pattern. She said, you do not know what you are talking about. He said, I delivered 7 violation notices to this neighborhood in the last 6 months. 4 of them turned into liens. 3 of the homeowners moved. That is not normal. Kimberly said, that is not your business. Eugene said, it is my business when you use the mail to run a scam. Kimberly stepped toward him. She said, get out of here before I report you to your supervisor. Eugene did not move. He said, go ahead. I already documented everything. Kimberly looked like she was about to explode. She spun back toward me and said, this is not over. You are going to regret this. I said, I already regret buying a house in your HOA, but I am not leaving. You are. She said, I am not going anywhere. The board supports me. I said, does the board know you are embezzling fine payments? She said, I am not embezzling anything. I said, then explain the missing payment from Lisa. Explain the missing minutes. Explain the backdated notices. Explain the fabricated conference. She said, I do not have to explain anything to you. I said, you will when I file a complaint with the Idaho Attorney General and copy your management company and your insurance carrier. She stared at me. Her hand was shaking. She said, you are bluffing. I said, try me. She turned and walked back to her car. She got in, slammed the door, and drove off. The neighbors started talking. Marcus walked over and said, that was intense. I said, it is not over. She is going to retaliate. Marcus said, let her. You have witnesses now. Eugene said, I can give you a written statement about the delivery pattern. I said, I already have one from you, but thank you. The next day I got a call from Monica at Ridgeline. She said Kimberly filed a complaint against me for harassment and trespassing. She said the board was meeting on November 18th to discuss my case and I was not invited. I told Monica that was illegal. She said the meeting was an executive session. I said executive sessions cannot be used to punish individual homeowners without giving them notice and a chance to respond. Monica said she was just relaying the message. I said I would see her at the meeting whether I was invited or not. She hung up. I called Sarah Gregg and told her what happened. She said we needed to file an injunction immediately to stop the board from taking any action against me without due process. She said she could draft the motion tonight and file it tomorrow morning. I told her to do it. She said it would cost another $2,000. I told her to send me the invoice. On November 17th, I got an email from Dale Finch, one of the other board members. Dale said he heard about the confrontation at the mailbox and he wanted to talk. He said he had concerns about how Kimberly was running the board. He said he tried to raise issues in the past, but Kimberly shut him down. He said he had copies of emails showing Kimberly pressuring Monica to delay records requests and deny appeals. He said he would forward them to me if I promised not to use his name publicly. I promised. He forwarded me 12 emails. Every one of them showed Kimberly directing Monica to obstruct transparency. One email said, delay the records request until after the lien is filed. Another said, do not respond to his hearing request. Let it time out. A third said, mark the violation as closed, but do not refund the fine. Kimberly was not just running a selective enforcement scheme. She was using the management company as her enforcement arm, and Monica was complicit. I forwarded the emails to Sarah Gregg. She called me back within the hour. She said this was the smoking gun we needed. She said the emails proved Kimberly was directing Monica to violate state law, and Monica was following orders. Sarah said we could now add Ridgeline Property Services as a defendant in the lawsuit. She said we could also file a complaint with the Idaho Real Estate Commission, which regulates property management companies. I told her to do both. On November 18th at 6:45 p.m., I showed up at the clubhouse for the board meeting. The door was locked. I knocked. No answer. I called Monica. She said the meeting was canceled. I said I just got an email yesterday saying it was happening tonight. She said the email was a mistake. I said I wanted written confirmation that the meeting was canceled. She hung up. I walked around to the back of the clubhouse. There were 3 cars in the parking lot: Kimberly's, Susan Merrick's, and Monica's. The lights were on inside. I walked up to the window and looked in. Kimberly, Susan, and Monica were sitting at a table. They were reviewing documents. I took out my phone and started recording. I knocked on the window. All 3 of them looked up. Kimberly stood up and walked to the door. She opened it 6 inches and said, "This is a private meeting. You need to leave." I said, "Idaho law requires open meetings for HOA boards. You cannot exclude me." She said, "This is an executive session." I said executive sessions are only for specific topics like personnel or litigation. You are not allowed to conduct general business in executive session. She said, "We are discussing a personnel matter." I said, "I am not personnel. I am a homeowner." She said, "You are a liability. Now leave before I call the police." I said, "Go ahead. I will show them the emails proving you are violating the Idaho Nonprofit Corporation Act." She slammed the door. I kept recording. 2 minutes later, Kimberly came back out with her phone. She said, "I am calling the tow company. Your truck is parked illegally." I said, "I am parked in a guest spot." She said, "Guest spots are for guests of residence in good standing. You are in default. Your truck is getting towed." I said, "You cannot tow my truck for attending a public meeting." She said, "Watch me." She dialed a number and said, "This is Kimberly Howard with Pheasant Run HOA. I need a tow at 4782 Pheasant Runway. Silver truck. Guest lot. Unauthorized parking. Yes, I will meet you there." I walked back to my truck and waited. 15 minutes later, a tow truck pulled into the lot. The driver got out and walked over to my truck. Kimberly came out of the clubhouse and met him. She handed him a piece of paper. The driver read it and looked at me. He said, "Sir, I have a request to tow your vehicle." I said, "On what grounds?" He said, "Unauthorized parking." I said, "I am a homeowner here. This is a guest spot. I am attending a board meeting." He said, "Ma'am, is that true?" Kimberly said, "He is not in good standing. He has no privileges." The driver said, "Ma'am, I cannot tow a vehicle based on HOA standing. I need a violation of parking rules." Kimberly said, "He is not a guest. He is a resident. Residents cannot park in guest spots." The driver said, "Is that in your parking policy?" Kimberly said, "Yes." I said, "No, it is not. I have the covenants right here. Residents can park in guest spots if all resident spots are full. There are 5 empty resident spots right now, but I am here as a guest attending a public meeting, so it does not matter." The driver looked at Kimberly. He said, "Ma'am, I cannot tow him unless you can show me a clear violation." Kimberly said, "I am the HOA president. I am authorizing the tow." The driver said, "That is not how it works." Kimberly said, "Then I will find another company." She pulled out her phone and started dialing. The driver shook his head, got back in his truck, and drove away. Kimberly kept calling. She called 4 different tow companies in the next 20 minutes. None of them would tow my truck. One of them told her to stop calling. By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered. They were watching from the sidewalk. Kimberly saw them and yelled, "This is not a public spectacle. Go home." Nobody moved. Marcus walked up and said, "Kimberly, you need to stop. You are making this worse." She said, "Stay out of this, Marcus." He said, "I am not staying out of it. You did the same thing to me. You are abusing your authority." She said, "I am enforcing the rules." He said, "No, you are inventing the rules." And now everyone knows it. Kimberly looked around at the crowd. Her face was bright red. She said, "Fine. You want a meeting? We will have a meeting. November 28th at 7 p.m. Be there." I said, "Will it be open to all homeowners?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Will you provide notice 72 hours in advance as required by law?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Will you allow me to present evidence?" She said, "You can present whatever you want. It will not change anything." I said, "We will see." She walked back to the clubhouse, got in her car, and drove away. Monica and Susan followed. The crowd dispersed. Marcus walked over and said, "You rattled her." I said, "Good. Rattled people make mistakes." He said, "What is your plan for the meeting?" I said, "I am going to present every piece of evidence I have and force the board to respond on the record. Then I am filing complaints with the Attorney General, the Real Estate Commission, and the county prosecutor." Marcus said, "You think it will work?" I said, "It has to." The next morning, I received an email from Dale Finch. He said he was resigning from the board effective immediately. He said he could not be part of what Kimberly was doing, and he wanted no part of the fallout. He attached a resignation letter addressed to the homeowners. In the letter, he said the board had failed to provide transparency, had selectively enforced rules, and had ignored multiple homeowner complaints. He said he tried to bring these issues to Kimberly's attention, but she refused to listen. He said he was forwarding copies of all his board correspondence to the homeowners and to Ridgeline. He encouraged the homeowners to demand accountability. I forwarded Dale's email to Sarah Gregg. She said this was huge. She said a board member resigning and publicly accusing the president of misconduct was rare and damaging. She said it strengthened our case significantly. She said she would amend the lawsuit to include Dale's resignation letter as evidence. On November 25th, I got the official notice for the November 28th meeting. It was sent via email at exactly 72 hours before the meeting, which meant Kimberly was following the law to the letter to avoid giving me another procedural complaint. The notice said the meeting would be held in the clubhouse at 7 p.m., and the agenda included homeowner comments, board reports, and a discussion of compliance matters. It did not specifically mention my case, but I knew that was the main event. I spent the next 3 days preparing my presentation. I printed copies of every document in my evidence binder, the backdated notices, the fabricated conference letter, Monica's confirmation letter, the email from Dale showing Kimberly directing obstruction, the lien records from the county, Trevor's case file, Marcus's case file, Lisa's testimony about the payment, Eugene's written statement, the metadata screenshots, and the video I took of Kimberly trying to tow my truck. I organized everything into a timeline. I wrote a 3-page statement summarizing the facts. I rehearsed my delivery. Sarah Gregg reviewed my materials and gave me feedback. She said to stay calm, stick to the facts, and do not let Kimberly bait me into an emotional reaction. She said emotional reactions undermine credibility. She said the evidence would speak for itself as long as I presented it clearly. On November 28th at 6:45 p.m., I arrived at the clubhouse. The parking lot was full. At least 30 homeowners were inside. I walked in with my evidence binder and a box of printed handouts. Kimberly was sitting at the front table with Susan Merrick and Monica. Dale's chair was empty. I took a seat in the third row. Marcus sat next to me. Trevor drove up from Nampa and sat behind me. Eugene came in at 6:55 and stood in the back. Kimberly called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. She said the board would hear homeowner comments for 30 minutes, then move to board business. She asked if anyone wanted to speak. I raised my hand. She looked at me and said, "Anyone else?" No one else raised their hand. She said, "Fine, you have 5 minutes." I said, "I need more than 5 minutes." She said, "5 minutes is the limit." I said, "Idaho law does not impose a time limit on homeowner comments at open meetings." She said, "This board imposes a 5-minute limit." I said, "Then I am formally objecting to that limit, and I am requesting it be recorded in the minutes." She said, "Noted. You have 5 minutes. Start now." I walked to the front and set my binder on the table. I handed out copies of my timeline to every homeowner in the room. Kimberly tried to stop me. She said, "You cannot distribute materials without board approval." I said, "These are public records. Homeowners have a right to see them." She said, "Sit down or I will end the comment period." I said, "Go ahead. I will read my statement from my seat." I walked back to my seat and stood up. I said, "My name is listed in your records. I am a homeowner at 4911 Jasper Court. I am here to present evidence that the board president, Kimberly Howard, has been conducting a selective enforcement scheme involving fabricated violations, backdated notices, obstructed appeals, and embezzlement of fine payments. I have documentation proving these claims, and I am requesting the board take immediate action to investigate and remove Kimberly Howard from her position." The room went silent. Kimberly stood up and said, "That is defamation. You are out of order." I said, "It is not defamation if it is true. Let me present the evidence." She said, "You have 4 minutes left." I said, "Then I will summarize. In October, I received a violation notice for a camera mount I never installed. The notice was backdated by 6 days. The metadata proves it. I then received a letter claiming I missed a pre-hearing conference that was never scheduled. Ridgeline confirmed the conference did not exist. When I tried to appeal, the board denied my hearing and started accruing fines. I now supposedly owe over $1,000 for violations that do not exist. This is not an isolated case. I have identified at least 4 other homeowners who were targeted with the same tactics. One of them paid a fine in cash directly to Kimberly Howard, and the payment was never recorded. That is embezzlement. I also have emails from a former board member showing Kimberly directing the management company to obstruct records requests and deny appeals. These emails prove Kimberly is violating Idaho Nonprofit Corporation Act Section 30.30.11 and HOA regulations under Idaho Code Title 55. I am requesting an immediate vote to suspend Kimberly Howard pending an independent audit of all violation cases from the past 3 years. Kimberly said, "You are out of time. Sit down." I said, "I am not done." She said, "You are done. Security, remove him." There was no security. Nobody moved. Kimberly looked at Monica. Monica looked at the floor. Kimberly said, "This meeting is over." Susan Merrick, the other board member, said, "Kimberly, wait. We need to respond to this." Kimberly said, "There is nothing to respond to. He is lying. Susan said, he has documents. We should at least review them. Kimberly said, I am not reviewing anything. This is a witch hunt. Trevor stood up from the back of the room. He said, I am one of the homeowners he is talking about. Everything he said is true. Kimberly hit me with a fake violation, refused to look at my evidence, and forced me to pay a lien. I moved because I could not afford to fight her. She needs to be removed. Marcus stood up. He said, same here. Kimberly fined me for a fence color that was compliant. She changed the rules after I submitted proof. I paid $600 because I did not know I could fight back. Now I know I should have. Lisa stood up. She said, Kimberly took $350 in cash from me for a violation that did not exist. She told me it would clear the fine immediately. The payment was never recorded. Where did that money go? Kimberly's face went pale. She said, I do not know what you are talking about. Lisa said, yes, you do. February 9th of last year, you came to my house. You took the money. You gave me a handwritten receipt. I still have the receipt. It is in my car. I can get it right now. Kimberly said, that is not true. I said, Lisa, go get the receipt. Lisa walked out. The room erupted in whispers. Kimberly sat down. Susan Merrick said, Kimberly, is this true? Kimberly said, no, this is a coordinated attack. Susan said, 4 homeowners are accusing you of the same thing. That is not a coincidence. Kimberly said, they are all friends. They planned this. I said, we are not friends. We are victims, and we are not the only ones. I have records from the county showing 7 liens filed in 3 years. 4 of them followed the same pattern. Backdated notices, denied appeals, escalating fines. Every single one was signed by you. The county has your signature on file. We can compare it to the notices and prove you used a digital stamp to pre-fill violation forms in bulk. Kimberly said, you are making this up. I said, the metadata does not lie. The file creation dates are all 5 to 7 days before the violation dates on the forms. That means you created the notices in advance and filled in the details later. That is fraud. Susan said, Kimberly, I need you to answer the question. Did you take cash payments from homeowners? Kimberly said, I do not have to answer that here. Susan said, yes, you do. We are the board. If you took cash payments and did not report them, that is embezzlement and we are liable. Kimberly said, I am not talking about this without a lawyer. Susan turned to Monica. She said, Monica, do you have records of cash payments from homeowners? Monica said, no. All payments are supposed to go through the portal or by check mailed to our office. Susan said, did Kimberly ever ask you to waive fines without recording payments? Monica hesitated. Then she said yes. Twice. She said the homeowners paid her directly and she wanted the violations closed without showing a payment in the system. Susan said, did you question that? Monica said yes. She told me it was board business and I should not ask questions. Susan said, did you document it? Monica said no. I should have, but I did not. Susan looked at Kimberly. She said, Kimberly, I am calling for an emergency vote to suspend you as president pending an independent investigation. Kimberly said, you cannot do that. Susan said, Idaho Code 3030-117 allows the board to remove an officer for cause. Taking undocumented cash payments as cause. I am making a motion. Kimberly said, you do not have a quorum. Dale resigned. Susan said, we have 2 board members present. That is enough for an emergency vote under our bylaws. Kimberly said, I am not recognizing this vote. Susan said, you do not have a choice. I move to suspend Kimberly Howard as president effective immediately and appoint an interim president until a special election can be held. All in favor? Susan raised her hand. Monica said, I am not a board member. I cannot vote. Susan said, then it is 1-0. The motion passes. Kimberly stood up and grabbed her clipboard. She said, this is illegal. I am contacting our attorney. Susan said, Go ahead. I am contacting the Attorney General. Kimberly walked toward the door. Lisa came back in holding a folded piece of paper. She said, I found the receipt. Kimberly tried to push past her. Lisa held up the receipt and said, This is your handwriting, Kimberly. You wrote $350 received. You signed your name. You took my money, and you never reported it. Kimberly grabbed for the receipt. Lisa pulled it back. I stepped between them. I said, Do not touch her. Kimberly glared at me. She said, You are going to regret this. I said, You already said that. It did not work the first time. She shoved past me and walked out. The room erupted in applause. Susan banged the gavel and said, Order. We need to finish this meeting properly. I am calling for a vote to authorize an independent audit of all HOA finances and violation records for the past 3 years. All homeowners in favor, raise your hand. Every hand in the room went up. Susan said, Motion passes. I am also calling for a vote to retain outside legal counsel to review the board's actions and determine if any laws were violated. All in favor? Every hand went up again. Susan said, Motion passes. I am suspending this meeting until we can reconvene with proper legal guidance. Thank you all for coming. People started coming up to me. Trevor shook my hand. Marcus hugged me. Lisa thanked me. Eugene walked over and said, You did it. I said, We did it. You were the one who kept track of the pattern. He said, I just delivered the mail. You connected the dots. Sarah Gregg called me at 8:30 p.m. She said she heard what happened from one of the homeowners who was at the meeting. She said Susan Merrick called her and asked if she would represent the HOA in the investigation. Sarah said she agreed. She said the first step was a forensic audit of the HOA's finances going back 3 years. She said if the audit found evidence of embezzlement, she would refer it to the Idaho Attorney General and the Ada County Prosecutor. She said Kimberly was done. I said good. The forensic audit took 6 weeks. The auditor was a CPA named Robert Stiles, who specializes in nonprofit fraud cases. He reviewed every transaction, every check, every portal payment, and every violation case. He also subpoenaed records from Ridgeline Property Services. On January 9th, Robert released his report. The report found that Kimberly Howard had collected at least $2,300 in cash payments from homeowners over a 2-year period and failed to report any of it. The payments were for fines that were either fabricated or selectively enforced. The report also found that Kimberly used a digital signature stamp to pre-fill violation notices in bulk and backdated them to create the appearance of timely enforcement. The report found that Ridgeline Property Services, specifically Compliance Officer Monica Chen, failed to exercise proper oversight and enabled Kimberly's misconduct by delaying records requests and obstructing appeals. The report recommended that Kimberly Howard be removed from the board permanently, that Monica Chen be terminated, and that Ridgeline Property Services be replaced as the management company. The report also recommended that the HOA refund all fines paid by homeowners in cases where violations were found to be fabricated or improperly enforced. The total refund amount was estimated at $8,500. On January 15th, the HOA held a special meeting to vote on the auditor's recommendations. Kimberly did not attend. Susan Merrick read the report aloud to the homeowners. Every recommendation was approved unanimously. Kimberly Howard was banned from serving on the board or any HOA committee. Monica Chen was terminated by Ridgeline. Ridgeline Property Services was given 90 days to transition management to a new company. The HOA hired a new management firm called Summit Association Management. The new firm immediately implemented a requirement that all violations include photo proof and a cure checklist to prevent selective enforcement. I received my refund check on January 22nd. It was for $1,050, covering all the fines Kimberly assessed against me plus interest. Trevor received $900. Marcus received $600. Lisa received $350. 4 other homeowners received refunds totaling $5,000. Kimberly Howard was not criminally charged because the amounts involved were below the threshold for felony embezzlement under Idaho law, but the Ada County prosecutor sent her a formal warning letter stating that any further misconduct involving HOA funds would be prosecuted. The Idaho Real Estate Commission fined Ridgeline Property Services $12,000 and placed the company on probation for 2 years. On February 5th, I was walking to the mailbox when I saw Kimberly's house. There was a for sale sign in the front yard. I called Marcus and told him. He said he heard she was moving to Oregon. I said, good riddance. He said the neighborhood was already calmer without her. I said it was about time. Eugene stopped by my house a week later. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a thank you card signed by 11 homeowners. The card said, "Thank you for standing up when the rest of us were too afraid. You saved this neighborhood." I put the card on my fridge. Sarah Gregg called me in March. She said the investigation was officially closed. She said Kimberly Howard agreed to a settlement that banned her from serving on any HOA board in Idaho for 10 years. She said Ridgeline agreed to pay the HOA's legal fees and implement mandatory training for all compliance officers. She said my case was used as the template for new enforcement standards across the state. She said other HOAs were adopting the same photo proof and cure checklist requirements. She said I started something bigger than one neighborhood. I said I just wanted to stop the fines. She said that is how every reform starts. The new board held elections in April. Susan Merrick was re-elected. Trevor moved back to the neighborhood and joined the board. Marcus became the compliance officer. The board passed new rules requiring all violation notices to include clear photographic evidence, a specific cure deadline, and a written explanation of the rule being violated. The board also passed a rule requiring all board meetings to be recorded and posted online within 48 hours. No more executive sessions for routine business. No more selective enforcement. No more invented rules. I kept my evidence binder. I added the auditor's report, the settlement agreement, the refund check, and the thank you card. I keep it in my office as a reminder that receipts always win. On a cool evening in late April, I was checking my mail at the cluster when a new neighbor walked up. She introduced herself as Emily. She just moved in 2 weeks ago. She said she heard about what happened with the old board president. She said she was relieved the HOA was under new management. She said she almost did not buy a house here because of the online reviews mentioning aggressive enforcement. I told her those days were over. She said she was glad. As I walked back to my house, I thought about the moment at the mailbox when Kimberly said, "I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes." That line became the title of a post someone made on the neighborhood Facebook group. The post went viral. Homeowners from other neighborhoods started sharing their own stories of selective enforcement and fabricated violations. The phrase paperwork and vibes became shorthand for HOA abuse. Someone even made t-shirts. Kimberly demanded proof and then panicked when I handed out copies. That moment at the November meeting, when I walked through the room distributing my timeline and she tried to stop me, was the turning point. She could have responded to my evidence. She could have addressed the accusations. Instead, she tried to suppress the information, and that confirmed everything I said. The homeowners saw it. The board saw it. Even Monica saw it. Once the truth was out, Kimberly had no defense. The management company disciplines the rep who enabled it. Monica Chen was fired within a week of the audit report. Ridgeline issued a written apology to the HOA for failing to provide proper oversight. The apology specifically mentioned Monica's role in delaying records requests and obstructing appeals. Ridgeline offered to waive management fees for 3 months as restitution. The board accepted. Kimberly got stripped of access to the portal admin tools the same day Susan Merrick suspended her as president. Susan changed all the admin passwords and locked Kimberly out of the violation tracking system, the financial records, and the communication tools. Kimberly tried to log in from her phone during the meeting and could not. That was the moment she realized she had lost control. She grabbed her clipboard and stormed out, but the damage was done. She had no power anymore. The payoff was exactly what I wanted, a requirement that all violations include photo proof and a cure checklist. No more vague accusations. No more backdated notices. No more moving goalposts. Every violation now has to be documented with a photo showing the specific issue, a written explanation of the rule being violated, and a step-by-step checklist of what the homeowner needs to do to cure it. If the HOA cannot provide all three, the violation is invalid. That rule is now in the covenants. It cannot be changed without a vote of the homeowners. I ran into Susan Merrick at the grocery store in May. She said the new management company was working out well. She said violations were down by 70% because the new rules forced the board to be more careful. She said the neighborhood felt less tense. She thanked me again for pushing back. I told her I was just protecting my own house. She said that is how good governance starts. Trevor texted me in June. He said he was glad he moved back. He said serving on the board gave him a sense of closure. He said he wished he had fought harder the first time, but he was grateful he got a second chance. I told him he did not need to wish. He was fighting now, and that is what mattered. Marcus invited me to a backyard barbecue in July. Half the neighborhood showed up. People were laughing, kids were playing, and nobody mentioned the HOA. It felt normal. It felt like what a neighborhood should be. Marcus pulled me aside and said, "You know what the best part is? We do not talk about Kimberly anymore. She is gone, and we moved on." I said that is the whole point. You win when the bad actor is irrelevant. I still install security cameras for a living. I still understand timestamps and metadata and privacy laws. I still keep records of everything. But now I also know that receipts are not just for my job. They are for life. When someone lies to your face, when someone moves the goalposts, when someone tries to bury you with paperwork and vibes, you fight back with facts. You document everything. You build the file. You connect the dots. You force the liar to answer on the record. And when they refuse, you let the evidence speak for itself. Kimberly Howard thought she could control the narrative by controlling the records. She thought she could invent violations, backdate notices, and pocket cash payments without anyone noticing. She thought homeowners would just pay the fines and move on because fighting back was too expensive and too exhausting. She was right about most people, but she was wrong about me. I reopened a cold case she thought was buried, and I caught her red-handed. I connected Trevor's case, Marcus's case, Lisa's case, and my own case. I found the pattern. I gathered the proof. I forced the confrontation. I made her lie in front of witnesses. And when she tried to shut me down, I handed out the receipts and let the homeowners see for themselves. The truth does not need a loud voice. It just needs a clear record. Thank you for spending your time with me.